So today we return to the metaphors of Jesus, the I am statements. And we're looking today at the metaphor that blends the two I am statements of Jesus concerning the fact that he is the door and the shepherd. I wanted to say just a few more things about doors. We had spent some time a few weeks ago talking about that metaphor of the door. But there was a few things in addition that I thought might help us with our thinking. A door is a functional unit. It is a legitimate point of entry and exit. A door to be functional requires movement. A door that doesn't move is really just a wall. And in these metaphors, Jesus is both the door and the shepherd. In the scriptures, there are many references to doors. In this metaphor, the standard entrance into the fold, as Jesus talks about, is through the door. Any other way into the fold is the way of the thief and the robber. And we spent some time a few weeks ago reading this. I'd like to go back to that just for a moment in John chapter 9, and remind you, or to highlight that metaphor again. Truly, truly, I say to you, he who does not enter by the door into the fold of the sheep, but climbs up from some other way, he is a thief and a robber. But he who enters by the door is a shepherd of the sheep. To him the doorkeeper opens, and the sheep hear his voice, and he calls his own sheep by name and leads them out. When he puts forth all his own, he goes before them, and the sheep follow him because they know his voice. And a stranger they simply will not follow, but will flee from him because they do not know the voice of a stranger. This figure of speech Jesus spoke to them, but they did not understand what those things were which he had been saying to them. Jesus therefore said to them, Truly, truly, I say to you, I am the door of the sheep. All who come before me are thieves and robbers, but the sheep did not hear them. I am the door. If anyone enters through me, he shall be saved and shall go in and out and find pasture. The thief comes only to steal and to kill and to destroy. I came that they might have life and have it more abundantly. I am the good shepherd. The good shepherd lays down his life for the sheep. He then goes on to say in verse 14, I am the good shepherd, and I know my own, and my own know me. Even as the Father knows me, and I know the Father, and I lay down my life for the sheep. And I have other sheep which are not of this fold. I must bring them also, and they shall also hear my voice, and they shall become one flock with one shepherd. In Revelation 3, verse 8, Jesus talks about the door. Revelation 3, verse 8. I know your deeds. Behold, I have put before you an open door, which no one can shut, because you have little power and have kept my word, and have not denied my name. Doors, as we see, can be open, and doors can be shut. It seems like the default position for Jesus is the open door. The open door is the way of grace. And Jesus, it seems to have the open door policy. In Exodus 12, we gain a further insight into that door. Here we see the story of the Passover and the door frame, or the door posts, including the part above the door, the lintel, is painted with the blood. This blood on the doorpost is why the door can be opened. It is the price of salvation. It is the way of the cross. As long as the shepherd is in the fold, it seems the door remains open. But by Jesus standing at the door, being at the door, we are protected. Our salvation is assured. and it is confirmed by that blood on the doorpost. But it seems as if it's the tendency of mankind to shut the door. Our fear, our insecurity, our retreat into isolation makes it our own natural inclination to shut the door. When the door is open, the Good Shepherd stands there providing safety and refuge and comfort. It seems that when we shut the door, we introduce an element of uncertainty about what is on the other side of the door. On the one hand, we see in Revelation 3, verse 12, the metaphor of Jesus knocking at the door, at the closed door. In James 5, verse 9, it talks about the judge is standing at the door. And in Genesis 4, verse 7, in the story of Cain and Abel, God talks about sin crouching at the door. And so we see that the closed door leaves uncertainty on the other side, whereas the open door is the way of grace, the door that no man can shut. But the open door does more than that. It is the portal for all who hear the voice of God to respond. One of the most remarkable features, I think, of this metaphor of the sheep and the door and shepherds and the open and the shut door and so forth is the notion that there are other sheep which are not of this fold who hear and know and respond to the voice of God. What I want to ask this morning is, how do you know when you hear the voice of God? In 1 Samuel 3, there's a story of the young boy Samuel who's been taken by his mother Hannah to the temple. And during the night, he hears his name being called. And 3 times he hears his name being called and mistakes the voice of God for the voice of Eli, his mentor. It's interesting that although he was in the temple, he was still impervious to the voice of God in terms of recognition of it. And in Judges chapter 6, we see the story of Gideon, who interrogates God through a series of questions concerning the dryness of the fleece and the dryness of the ground and the wetness and so forth. I think you all know the story real well. But again, it's clear that if he hears the voice of God, or if he sees manifestation of God's voice, he doesn't seem to place validity in it. And so the question remains, how is it that we can hear and understand and we can validate the voice of God? Those who are his sheep apparently have an unmistakable recognition of his voice. Those that are in the fold are remarkably, those who are in the fold, and remarkably those who are even outside the fold, who are part of his flock but not within the fold. So I'm wondering today, how do we recognize the voice of God? History, both ancient and modern, is replete with those who claim to recognize the voice of God. I think you famously recall George Bush's assertion that the invasion of Iraq was directed by his recognition of the voice of God. I have a few stories about God told me to do. The teacher says that a higher power told him to attack a kid with a skateboard. An elementary school teacher in California was caught on tape attacking a skateboarder, a student, who says that his action was mitigated by a voice from God. A mom allegedly tries to drown her son in a puddle because Jesus told her to do so. A man allegedly stabs his grandmother and blames the archangel Michael, who told him that he should kill his grandmother. A nurse thinks his grandmother was possessed and beats her to death. A suspect says that Jesus and Mary told me to kill him because he's Satan's spawn. He's talking about her husband. And in a tongue-in-cheek article in the New Yorker entitled "God Caught Backing Multiple GOP Candidates for President." After a thorough investigation, Daily Intel has discovered that God is separately backing at least 3 different contenders for the presidential Republican nomination. This is in 2009, in the run-up to the last presidential race. Herman Cain was told by God that he should run for president. God has told him, he says, that I've got something special for you to do, and that is to become the President of the United States of America. But about the same time, God was also encouraging Rick Santorum to throw his hat into the race. Karen Santorum, his wife, said that it really boils down to God's will. What is it that God wants? We have prayed a lot about this decision. We believe with all our hearts that this is what God wants. And Michelle Bachmann, who was ready to jump into the race as well, said she would never run into the race without God's personal endorsement. It felt that the Lord was calling me to do what it would. If I felt that the Lord was calling me to do it, I would do it, she answered. When I have sensed that the Lord is calling me to do something, I have said yes. And if I'm called to serve in that realm, I would serve, and so forth. So he also apparently in that race went out of his way to let Mike Huckabee know that he should not run for president, nor should he consider it at that time, because he had a more important task of making some DVDs concerning conservative American history and so forth. God, it says, as this article concludes, could not be reached for comment by press time because the spokesman said he was helping a baseball player hit a game-winning home run, giving an old church-going lady the winning lottery numbers, making sure that a plane made it through a turbulent okay, and helping someone survive a heart attack, and also just for fun creating a new animal that looks like a cross between a leopard and an alligator. All are evidences of people claiming to hear the voice of God. I don't know about you, maybe you've clearly heard the voice of God, perhaps in a whisper, perhaps in a clap of thunder, out loud, or maybe just in your soul. But the question for today, given the story here of those who are both in the fold, who are sheep of the shepherd, of the good shepherd, who hear his voice and know it, and those who are outside the fold, who are also responsive to the voice of God, how is it that we can know the voice of God? Can the voice of God be validated for ourselves? Can we also validate it for others? Would it be easy for us to say, well, that's just craziness that God is telling you to kill your baby, or God is telling you to run for president, or God is telling you to invade Iraq? These are not ways in which God would communicate. Is it possible for us to validate the voice of God, not only for ourselves, but for the voice of others? You see, there's something that is very strong inside us, and that is that if we believe we hear the voice of God, and if we believe we follow the voice of God, then somehow we believe that something good is going to come out of that. Very few people would hear the voice of God leading them into destruction, or into distress, or into evil. Somehow, hearing and following and understanding the voice of God is deeply related to something good or better that might come out of life and in our living. Is it possible? What are your thoughts on this metaphor of the scriptures? Jesus making the unequivocal statement that his sheep hear his voice and recognize it, and other sheep as well, who are not even in the fold, hear his voice as well and recognize it. How can we recognize the voice of God?